There we go. Take one, Andy Glass. And we're going to start off with a classic warm-up question, Andy, if that's all right for you. How do you end up playing guitar, of all instruments?
In a school, primary school, so I would have been about 10, some chap brought in a guitar and instantly got the attention of the, particularly the females, I suppose, in the class, and I thought that was fantastic. So I asked if I could have a go, and grabbed this thing, which because I had no idea how to play, and just started whacking away on it. Did feel an immediate affinity with it, but shortly afterwards noticed my fingers were bleeding over this guitar, which was not ideal. But so that was my first introduction to it, and I just thought, oh yeah, I love this instrument, and off I went. So I persuaded my dad to buy me a little guitar. They were very supportive, my parents, and off I went. Got some lessons from for a little while from the village. We were in a little village in Wales. I got some lessons from the village guitar teacher. Learned some Bob Dylan songs. So she got me started, and then I was off, and kind of discovered Deep Purple and bands like that. So moved away from those kind of folk tunes that I was taught in the first instance, and off into rock and roll,
Cool. And when did you decide you wanted to be a musician for real, shall we say?
I think from that moment, really, from the first moment of getting a guitar and realising that I had a connection with it and that I could make music with it, that became my passion. In terms of becoming a real musician, that was a very sort of slow evolution, I guess. I think that I felt that that's what I was early on. That was what I was good at, and that kind of. I suppose I was. I think I probably was being creative from early on, because, it just finding little things that pleased me that I could play. Rather than trying to imitate other particular musicians. So I think I felt that from the beginning. At what point I felt like a real musician? I think probably when Martin Kelty a couple of weeks ago said I was.
It's interesting.
The thing is with, culturally in this country, when you say to someone, you talk to someone and they say, well, what do you do? And I say, well, yeah, I'm a musician. Their response is, oh, cool, but what do you really do? So there's always been that feeling that, I know that's what I am, but because it's not necessarily reflected back by our society, So it's true. It's only quite recently, I think, in fact, since making an album that feels, it's what I want it to be for the first time. That's true, and the band is what I want it to be for the first time, and that has people's response to that has actually made me feel more like an artist than I ever have before.
And that's taken how long to get to that stage?
Well, this band's been going for 41 years, so it's taken a while, but obviously I was playing before then. I tell you what, actually, before the band started, I was around a group of people who spent their time jamming and making music together in a very kind of organic, sort of pure way, I suppose. I certainly felt like a musician then, because, it's not really something that's just happened. I really felt like a musician then, because the communication between us through that process. And actually, there's one person in particular that I'm thinking of when I'm talking about this is Margaret Phillips, who is Robin Phillips, our current bass player, Robin's mum. So Rob was, about 10 at the time, and I was living in an idyllic canal side squat, a sort of derelict place with a few mates, and it became sort of a hub of creative people and people that were in a process of discovery, I suppose, is one way of putting it. And Margaret lived nearby, and we used to go backwards and forwards between our two places and literally spend hours and hours, just jamming, just making music together, playing for hours, and it was beautiful, and there was a communication happening there in its kind of most sort of natural, organic form, that kind of musical communication. It sounds like a hippie thing, which it was, but at that point there, I felt like a musician, that's for sure.
And what time period is that, and who else was involved?
So this is late 70s, I was like 17, 18. It's funny how things happen. I met this guy at a bus stop. I was living in Stone, which is just outside Aylesbury, and met this guy at a bus stop called Paul Garrett, and he said, we just got chatting. And he said, I'm living in this canal side squat, do you fancy coming over, And you had to walk, a good mile. You could only walk to this place, a good half-mile walk from the road. And I ended up moving in there. So there was him, there was and a couple of other friends from the Aylesbury scene living there. And Margaret was a friend of Paul's. So she came round and we made that connection, and shortly after I met Mark Elton, who was the kind of my co-founder, if you like, the co-founder of Solstice, on a park bench in Aylesbury through another friend. He was a classically trained musician and a really exceptionally good musician. I don't know whether he was quite good enough to sort of make it as a classical solo performer. I don't know, but he was exceptional. But that was all that he had played before. So he kind of got involved and came along, and we jammed together. And he'd really only played stuff from the page before. So although he had this incredible technical ability, he had never improvised. So this was a new world for him, that he discovered as a part of that process, and because of his incredible chops, once he realised that he could express himself through playing, of course it was incredible what he could do. So there was a lot of kind of, as I say, discovery going on at the time, and me and Mark played a lot together, and that was what evolved into the band in 1980, when we decided, hey, some of this music we're playing together, let's kind of formulise it a little bit, let's organise it a bit, maybe we could start a band. But it all came out of that sort of jamming environment and community. I lived, after the squat, I moved up, got myself a caravan and lived on a traveller site in the very conservative area of Berkhamsted, which was kind of, unusual, strange. But that was a really beautiful place, and again, it was sitting around the fire in the evening, friends coming around, playing music together. It's a lot of interesting stories from that period, actually. But anyway, that was the kind of environment that the band came from, and we had no ambition other than to sort of try and put some of this music that we were making into the context of a band, and go and play some gigs, see what people thought.
And so how did that evolve into making your first album, Silent Dance?
Well, that's a long way off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we got together with a drummer called Dave Harden and a bass player, Mark Hawkins, who remained in the band for most of its existence at that period. And we started playing together in a basement, and put a set of material together, and got our first gig in Berkhamsted Town Hall in 1980, supporting a band called As Above, So Below. And we were genuinely amazed at the response of the audience, which was incredibly warm. I mean, we were floored by it. You know, we didn't go in there with expectations other than hoping that we could, you know, play some of this music and people would listen to it, and we'd get through it, and it would be fun, because that was kind of our agenda, really. You know, just to enjoy making some music together. And the warmth of the reaction was extraordinary. So of course we thought, all right, we've got something here. You know, let's do some more of it. So that was 1980. The first album was 1984. So, you know, when you're 20, you know, early 20s, 4 years feels like a lifetime. You know, so a lot went on in that, and we started. I'd been in a band previously called Electric Gypsy, and in that band was a bass player, Doug Irvin, singer Alan King, and drummer Mick Pointer, and we were based in Long Marston. We had some fun playing some music together. Me and the singer were, I suppose, we were having fun, and we were quite fond of our recreationals, and as a result we kind of got pushed out of that. We were too rock and roll at that point, and we were replaced ultimately by Steve Rothery and Fish, which is the band that evolved into Marillion. A very different kind of band in many ways, because they had, you know, Fish was very driven. You know, he knew what he wanted, he knew where he was going, and he kind of knew instinctively how to get there and how to do it. But so I was a part of that band. And why have I gone back to talking about this? Oh,
the journey to Silent Dance was a long one.
Yeah, it was a long one. Yeah. Oh yeah, okay, I get it now. Yeah, so that band evolved into Marillion. Now Marillion, as I say, they knew what they were doing, you know, and they got straight to it. They started working the local venue scene, and quickly got themselves an audience and started building on that. So of course we remained friends, and then Solstice came together. So they were okay, guys, come and play. You know, come and do some gigs with us, and they gave us support. And as they went up the ladder, you know, and they got to the Marquee Club, so they effectively took us with them. And there was a lovely community there of kind of progressive rock bands, although we denied that moniker at the time. Happy to have it now, but at the time we didn't really like it at all. But the media came up with this, you know, new wave of British progressive rock, and Marillion were at the forefront of that.
Why did you not see yourself as progressive? Why did you sort of go against that label? What was it about the label that you didn't like?
Well, we felt that you know, the bands like IQ, Marillion, 12th Night perhaps, and others were really channeling that sort of early Peter Gabriel period Genesis. You know, that they were great. I mean, I'm not knocking them, but that's where we felt that they were coming from, and we felt like we were coming from somewhere quite different. You know, we had a female singer, which was, in fact, at the beginning we didn't have any singer at all, but pretty rapidly we got Sue Robinson in on vocals, and so we had a lead singer, which at the time was very unusual. I mean, there were bands like Renaissance that had female singers, but that was unusual. We had Mark playing violin, which was also unusual, and we were kind of more rooted in a sort of folky vibe, I felt. I mean, certainly we were influenced by Yes, and later on Sandy Lee joined the band, and she kind of had that John Anderson vocal sound, which, you know, exaggerated that connection with Yes, because I mean, I always have been and still am a huge Yes fan, so of course that was in there, but we didn't really want to be pigeonholed. I mean, our background, again, at the time was, or certainly mine and Mark's, the free festival scene, which was vibrant at that time. Before Thatcher, you know, in '85, put a stop to it all. You know, there are some acceptable reasons for that, but the free festival scene was incredible and vibrant, and you know, that was why you know, you'd see these great bands playing late into the night, jamming, just creating this fabulous atmosphere, and that was my ambition, was to do that. That's what I wanted to be, you know, this kind of travelling minstrel, entertaining at free festivals, you know, in the Tibetan Ukrainian mountain troop tent, you know, at 3, which we did do, you know, we did all that stuff, and me and Mark were, and Sandy, you know, we were right into all that. So we were coming from a different place to the other bands in terms of our ambition, in terms of how we'd evolved and where we'd come from. So, you know, and also we had a kind of distaste for the music press, for the music industry, which, you know, may or may not have been a sensible thing, but that's where we were at. That commercialisation of music, we were really anti that. So I think we didn't want to be bagged with that scene particularly, and so that progressive rock thing, although it's not unreasonable, we were, you know, we tried to, we didn't really want to accept it.
You spoke about the free festivals. I don't really know much about this scene at all.
Yeah.
So, do you know, could you let me know some names of festivals that you played at? And you mentioned that Thatcher put an end to it all. What's all that about?
Yeah. So there was a whole series of a circuit. There was a whole circuit of free festivals in the UK back then. So, you know, you could go to the Psilocybin Festival in West Wales, you know, and these were small, very small, you know, like a few hundred people, right through to the bigger ones, like Stonehenge. And also there was the Glastonbury Green Gathering, which was a small kind of alternative Glastonbury thing, which didn't cost any money. So there were a whole series of them, and there were people that would literally spend the summer travelling from one to the next, either just to attend it or to perform at them, and it was a vibrant scene. The thing was that a thing called the Peace Convoy was formed or came together, which was literally that, a convoy of trucks and buses, and it kind of got a bit out of hand. It got very, very big, and this kind of gave, I think, Thatcher, who was, you know, didn't like the whole idea of free stuff happening for a start. And I mean, there were some issues, yeah, I get it, but I think the Peace Convoy kind of got a bit out of hand, and it gave them a reason to say, right, we're going to stop this. And they passed a law which I think it limited the number of vehicles that could come together in one place to, you know, 10 or 20 or something like that. And so we played Stonehenge in '83 and '84, which were incredible experiences. I mean, just incredible. But by the time '85 came around, everyone knew what was going to happen. There was the big convoy was going to go to Stonehenge, and the police were going to stop it or try and stop it. So I didn't really want to experience that, so I didn't go. But they drafted in police in riot gear from all over the place. I mean, an army of them. And what happened was as the peace convoy arrived for the festival, they diverted them into a field, where they were effectively trapped, and then they viciously and brutally attacked the vehicles. I mean, it's all on film, you know. So vehicles with children inside, babies inside, and police just smashing the windows and, you know, brutally treating these people that were, by this time, just, you know, just wanting to get away, you know, just, you know, let them off the site and let them go. So it was horrendous. And actually, the 96 album Circles, and that track, Circles, is talking about that experience, and I've used a lot of the newsreel audio in that track, so you can kind of hear some of it. But if you go on YouTube, you'll find it. And that effectively brought to an end that whole festival circuit. They just, you know, the authorities just smacked down on the whole thing. So out of that has come the growth of the commercial festivals, and now of course there are, you know, we can go and glamp at them if you've got the money. So yeah, so we were very much part of that environment, and, you know, I mean, me and Mark were living in vehicles, and that was we felt at home in that scene, and there was a lot of magic about it. There really was, you know. I know there were problems as well, but aren't there always everywhere?
So, starting with aspirations of just playing free festivals, and you talk about relationship with Marillion. You could definitely see what was going on with Marillion. Was there absolutely no attraction to that commercial side at all, or did you not sort of think maybe that's not such a bad thing?
Yeah, yeah, we were, because as we came up and we started to get our own headlines at places like the Marquee and other venues. In '83, we played at Reading Festival, which was a really big deal for an unsigned band. So of course, there started to be some interest from the industry in us, although we couldn't be more unfashionable. I mean, we and the other bands in the community were slammed in the music press. You know, it was almost journalists, you know, if they wanted to keep their jobs, they had to slam the prog scene, whether they liked it or not. And we had journalists that were on our side, like, you know, Phil Bell for Sounds magazine, you know, a paper, was very supportive of us, but he had to put it in a very kind of mocking, derogatory way. You know, I kind of like this band of, you know, ridiculous hippies, you know, from Dingley Dell, but I kind of like some of it, you know. Just to protect himself. So, but there was none. You know, I mean, Marillion was signed to EMI, so that proved that, and they did well. So that proved that there was a potential to commercialise what we were doing. So of course there was interest, and we had approaches from John Arneson, who was Marillion's manager, and in hindsight we probably should have listened to him, but we didn't. You know, we were just not interested. We had we got as far as a record company's office, Career Records, who were very interested in the band, and me and Mark kind of reluctantly went to the head office, you know, met the label boss to hear what he had to say. And he said, I've got this great idea, guys. What I want you to do is wear some Stetsons, and we're going to do like a hoedown thing with the fiddle and guitar. And that just confirmed all our fears of, you know, what it could be like to have a record deal, you know. And so he had completely and utterly missed the point, and was just thinking novelty records, you know. Couple of you know, boys playing, because we did that in the set, you know, we did this kind of hoedown stuff, which was our sort of, you know, anti-prog thing, you know. So we do these sort of long drawn out songs with lots of solos and stuff, and then we do these, you know, 2-minute kind of jigs and reels, and and kind of party stuff, which was great fun, and I think part of the appeal for the audience actually. So that's what the record company latched onto. So that just kind of confirmed our fears, really, that the record industry was not for us. So yeah, so there was the interest was there, but we were, other guys in the band, like our rhythm section, Martin and Mark were probably very dismayed by our attitude, but we just didn't want to know, really. The thing is, we were doing it. We were doing what we wanted to do. We had our bus. We were travelling around, playing lots of gigs. We could kind of keep it going just about financially, keep our heads above water, and that was all we wanted. So the commercial, the industry didn't really appeal to us, and that may have been very naive of us, but that's as it was.
What would you have done differently now, looking back, if you would be able to speak to your younger self?
Yeah.
What advice would you give?
I wouldn't have done. I wouldn't have done anything differently, to be honest, because we had the time of our lives, and what ended the band was nothing to do with not taking the opportunities that may or may not have come our way. What I didn't know. Okay, this is the advice, because what I didn't realise at the time was, I think it's Neil Young who said it actually, that the songs and the music are the vehicle. Okay, the band are the drivers, and what I didn't realise at the time was the chemistry in a band is what it's all about, really. Yes, the music's important, but it's the band that drives it, and the band that makes that connection with the listener. And I didn't really appreciate that at the time, and we decided when we were recording the album, for a number of reasons, we decided the lineup wasn't right. Now, I mean, we'd seen other bands do this, I suppose, and driven bands will, and it certainly happens in Marillion, if they think someone is not quite cutting it, they're gone. We bring in someone who can do it. You know where you're going, and this is what I need to do to achieve it. And so maybe some of that came into us. Me and Mark were getting quite obsessive about the music and the performance of the music being as good as it possibly could be. And long and short of it is that we felt that a new bass player was the right thing to do, and it was absolutely the wrong thing to do. So if I was to go back and give myself some advice, it would be to understand the importance of the chemistry in it. It's such a rare thing when you have a band and that chemistry works together and it communicates, and the feeling in the band it's unique, and changing any element of it is potentially a disaster, and it certainly was in our case. So that's where things started going wrong, which was a decision we made that had nothing to do with commercial interest or external pressures. And then Sandy Lee left the band, which was another, Sandy was another absolutely crucial part of what the band was at the time we made the album and for several years before that. And we thought, it'll be fine, and we got in this incredible bass player, brilliant guy, and singer, but it had changed. The chemistry had gone, and really that was the beginning of the end, So we did the album in '84. In '85 we did a tour, we played Glastonbury, we did some great stuff, but we knew it was kind of over, really. And also Ken Bowley, the bass player, and Barbara Deason, the singer, they were very focused on, there's a lot of potential here. Let's look for that commercial success. Let's look for interest from the industry. Let's do what it takes now. Now remember, we're mid-80s, Spandau Ballet. That's and that was their vibe. Let's and of course me and Mark were like having none of it. So that was the end of it. Card's gone, yeah.
Done half an hour there. That's great. So I'm going to restart that. That's good. And got a. Oh yeah, how's your back doing? All right. You're doing great. You're doing a grand job.
The pills have kicked in.
Codeine or whatever. Oh. So the change of personnel, did it happen before, during, or after the album? Talk me through that.
Yeah. So the change of personnel came after the album. So because of course Mark and Sandy were both on Silent Dance. It was during the making of the album that we started thinking, we want to be, in terms of competency and musical performance, we want to be Steely Dan. We want to be that good. So therefore, we need the musicians in the band that have those kind of chops. And I can understand. One is always wanting to make the music as good as possible, always, and the performance of it as good as possible. But that was where we were naive, and that's something that I tell to young musicians now. If you found a chemistry, a partnership that is creative and working and producing, that's going to happen maybe once or twice in your lifetime, maybe never. So if you have it, treasure it, work through the problems, the arguments. Because, me and Mark were at each other's throats quite often creatively, because we were both extremely opinionated. But I mean, that's what made the music what it was at the time. And it was a wonderful creative partnership. And frankly, after Silent Dance, a partnership that was, for me, was missing through the intervening albums. The guys in the band are all fantastic and very creative in themselves, but I had a particular kind of foil there with Mark, and as I say, that has been missing in the intervening years. And I think the difference is with Sheer in the new album is that I kind of have that again with Jess. Someone that is is full of ideas, interprets things in her own way, and the vocal, that's the song, isn't it? It's delivering the song. It's the kind of, in a way, is the most important part of it. So having a kind of inspirational relationship with someone to work on the music at that level, the top lines, has made a huge difference, and I think actually the result, in some ways, this is why people are making connections to the first album, because in some ways that having that kind of creative energy again is what's informing the music and the outcome of it, in a way that it's in a similar way to what it did with Silent Dance. But yeah, we fought over stuff for sure. I wanted it to sound the way it's different now. I don't fight with Jess, but I fought with Mark because we both wanted it our way. So although we were kind of hippies and it had come from jamming and it was organic and all the rest of it, the bottom line was we still wanted what we wanted when it came to the final version of music, creating it.
And in terms of percentages, how would you say the writing of the material for Silent Dance? How would it work? Lyrics, music. How did you get how did it all come together? Yeah,
I think it varied from one track to the next. But I was, looking back, I would just say it was 50-50 with me and Mark. Because we both, he wrote lyrics for some stuff, I wrote it for the others, vice versa. I suppose most of the pieces started with me, and still do and always have done, playing some kind of rhythm and chord sequence. So that would probably be where it would start and evolve on from there. So yeah, it's hard to judge. And of course the band then and now input a huge amount of their own personality and their own interpretation of the music. And that's much more so on Sheer again. It's not just Jess, it's the rest of the band. Partly because of the opportunity lockdown gave us. So, Pete and Steve, they've spent weeks working on a track. So I would give them the rough overview, and then they would kind of hone the parts, that complemented it and drove the track. And Steve would come up with, most of the stuff I sent out to them had no keyboards on it at all. So Steve was literally working with a blank canvas, and I'd send him something, he'd come back and have added this part which provided a completely new dimension to the track. So there's an enormous amount of creative input on this album from the other guys in the band. Pete would have a program groove, and then he'd just fill it out with his personality, and accent certain things and lift certain things and make it dynamic. So these are things that we were able to do back in the day on the first album, and that effectively lockdown gave us, we couldn't play together, we were never able to play together, but each musician was able to really think about what they were going to do and how to lift this music. So it's much more like the first album in that sense. Intervening albums have largely been, right, we've got a weekend in the studio, a couple of days, Pete, come on in, lay this down, and not really have time to develop it or really put himself into it as he has with the new album. So all those things have combined to make this special.
Good. Now, in the 80s, just to go back to Silent Dance again, you got a huge buzz from the free festival scene, and Solstice was very much about performance.
Yeah.
Okay. Any kind of memorable gigs or that you mentioned the marquee and so on. How was the live scene for you? And the second question is as well to lead on to, remember, making the decision to make an album as well, because that's kind of like a more of a definite thing rather than just playing gigs.
Yes. Yeah. So first of all, there was the gig. There was a wide. Now, what's the word I'm looking for? First of all, every town had a rock club in it. Okay, so there were venues all over the place where we could play, and as I've mentioned, there were a lot of free festivals too. So we were able to put tours together. I have to say again, now, Solstice wouldn't have happened at all without the people around the band who helped make it happen. It's always the same. But back in the 80s, Guy Hewison kind of took on the mantle of manager, agent, and spent the day, every day, on the phone, setting up tours, talking to people. Now, without that, nothing would have happened. We would have played a few festivals, whatever, a few free festivals, and the local town hall, and that probably would have been about it. So saying earlier about us not being particularly driven, we actually relied on someone who was Guy Hewison. So he was able to book us tours. We'd go off for a month, we'd have a gig every night, working our way around the country. We used to go to Scotland every year and play there, so we built up these audiences over time. And as I said before, we were lucky enough, thanks to Marillion and others, to do gigs at the Marquee, and we ended up doing 2 consecutive nights because of the demand, which also enabled us to give other bands the opportunity. Pendragon, IQ, Twice Bitten, Liaison, all these bands that we would give supports to, and then they generated their own audience and they would end up doing headlines. It's a very vibrant live scene in a way that unfortunately now there's not so many venues as we know. So we would just about be able to keep things going, but of course one of the things that we would do to supplement income would be to sell merchandise. There again, another Tim Smith, another guy that helped us enormously. So he would be at base writing letters, sending T-shirts, badges to people, pre-internet obviously. So writing letters to people, and I've still got them. So again, these people made it happen. But so one of the things we did was to record cassettes. So pretty early on, our first cassette we recorded, which was before we had a singer. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Maybe it'll come back to me later. Anyway, so our first cassette was before we had a singer, and we would get 100 duplicated and flog them at gigs, and we'd have like 3 tracks on it, like an EP. And we did several of these during the course of the band, because we could. Even that was difficult to afford, so that would be a day in the studio. You'd go into the studio. Then, of course, studios were, expensive. We'd go in, you'd record 3 or 4 tracks, mix them all in, 8 hours, and, you'd have to go with whatever you ended up with. So, and then we'd duplicate them and sell them. And we did several of those through the 80s. But clearly, there was a demand for an album, which is, that's the holy grail, isn't it, for a band, is to do a 12-inch album. But, it was just out of our budget. We couldn't afford it. But we got a little publishing deal with, I'm not sure if they were Bayswater at the time, but they became Bayswater Music. And they gave us a little advance. And we thought, right, we'll use this to record an album. This is our opportunity to do it. And we had been, since the days living in the canal and living next to the canal, we listened to music all the time there, as well as playing it. And one of the artists that we adored, was a guy called Nigel Mansell-Jones, and in particular an album called Sentinel, another one called Ship to Shore. Just beautiful albums, and we listened to him a lot, loved it. Anyway, again, I think it was Guy that made it happen, but Nigel was contacted, and he said, "Yeah, I'm interested in producing your album." So we had a bit of money. We had Nigel Mansell-Jones wanting to produce it, which we just thought was going to be incredible, and we were thrilled about that. And he had. His studio was down in Cornwall in this idyllic vicarage residential studio. I mean, what more could you ask? And it was absolutely gorgeous, So we thought, right, great, well, this is it, we're going to make an album. And we went down there, we booked 2 weeks, we had our which is what our budget would allow. And at the end of 2 weeks, I think we had the drums down, So immediately there was an issue. So the album actually ended up taking 9 months to appear on vinyl. It was a long and at times very difficult process, but that's how the album came about, just in time for the band to split up.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
And talk us through who was playing on that first album.
Yeah. So. Lots of lineup changes. We had a number of singers. We started with no singer at all. Then we had Sue Robinson, a very young, I think she was 16 or 17, joined the band, and we immediately had a tour in Scotland organised. So a tour, that was our first tour actually, first proper tour, and we had a horse box with, it was suitable for carrying a horse. And, so there were going to be 9 of us in this vehicle, 8 blokes and Sue, and all the gear. So we had this thing where all the gear, we had a sort of split level thing, so all the gear went in, and then mattresses went on the gear, and there was a kind of luton, so it's a bit above the driving cab, which was the luxury quarters. So it was ridiculous, really, but amazing fun. But anyway, so we just got Sue in the band, and you're going to come and do this tour with us. And she's a minor, so I remember we had to go round to her mother's house and meet her and try and persuade her that her daughter, a 16, 17-year-old daughter, was going to be fine. With these 8 blokes in the back of a horse box for a couple of weeks around Scotland. And bless her mum agreed to it. I mean, if you ask me now if my daughter, could do that, I don't think so. So she was the first singer, and then she left after a time to join a band called Quasar, which is another band from the community, who, funnily enough, we're going to do a gig with next year. We've got Shelley Patton, lovely singer, and she appears actually on we got the front page of Sounds. Big deal, It's like the equivalent of the NME Melody Maker at the time. Sounds was one of the big music papers, and we got the front page of it, which was extraordinary. And again, I think, Guy, and he got a publicist involved called Keith Goodwin, and they made that happen. But, again, an unsigned band, it's a big deal. It really was a big deal. But Shelley unfortunately had some health issues with her voice and very quickly had to step down. That was singer number 2. Then Sandy Lee, who got introduced to us by a fan of the band, Jill Baker. So, Sandy was just perfect, really, and that was the kind of iconic lineup. So now it was myself, Mark Elton, Martin Wright, Mark Hawkins, and Sandy Lee. So that was the kind of the lineup that people think about, I think, when they think about that period of Solstice. And that was the lineup that went on to make the album, to make Silent Dance.
Cool. And so, moving on from Silent Dance, then you said there's a lot of comparison. There's fans have made certain comparisons between Sheer and Silent Dance. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it is. There's a number of things. I think it's the creative energy in the band, which is something that hasn't been there in the same way in the intervening years. So, Circles, Spirit, Prophecy. There's some good stuff on those albums, but they're different in this sense. The creative energy in the band in the 80s and the creative energy in the band now is linked. There's a connection between that. In the 80s it was Sandy Lee, and now it's Jess Holland. That's a big part of the story. The other thing is that, as I was saying earlier, that lockdown gave us this unique opportunity to spend, for all the members of the band, to spend as much time as they needed, interpreting the music, putting their interpretation, putting their parts in, honing their parts, trying things, finding the right, which is exactly what we would have done in the 80s, because we would have been working those tunes up in a rehearsal studio, in a rehearsal space of some kind, jamming through stuff, trying things, all this works, that doesn't. And uniquely, we've had the opportunity to do that with Sheer. And although hopefully it's only a once-in-a-lifetime thing in terms of lockdown, but I think we will be able to carry that forward now, that approach, and having that confidence that we can all, contribute in that way and to that extent with the music. So, and the other thing, perhaps more specifically, is that the creative partnership with Jess, which I find really inspiring. It's someone who she's full of energy, full of ideas, and every little thing that she contributes to the melody, to the interpretation, the feel of the thing, they're the things that I always end up loving most. So So what she's putting in is a unique, her personality, her unique personality, which just seems to work so perfectly with the music we're trying to create. So I find that very, very motivating, and it also has made me feel more confident about writing. The way Shia came together and the way that's turned out and the audience's response to that makes me feel more confident. And I can see we're working on new material now that Jess has become more confident. Shia was the first prog thing that she'd done ever. So this is all new territory for her. But she just, rather than kind of, I better do it this way, she's just done it her way. She's interpreted it instinctively how she would. And obviously she would be a little tentative about that to start with, right? But I can tell now as we're working on the next album how she's gone, right, this works, and has become more confident. So there's a combination of things. The contribution of the whole band, working with a singer that is, inspiring me. And I think that's, in a nutshell, is the connection with Silent Dance, which was kind of made under the same circumstances. I had this very vibrant creative thing with Mark Elton, Sandy Lee at the time, also great creative energy, and we were spending the time on it, on the music, and now we're finally getting to play the music from Shia together as a band in a room. It's wonderful. I mean, it's working because everyone's playing what they wanted to play anyway in the first place and what they've contributed, rather than rapidly trying to get a version of a programmed thing that kind of works. They've really put themselves into it, so it makes a huge difference. And the other thing that's really been surprising about rehearsing this material is the way the old stuff is working with this new lineup. So we're playing some material that we haven't played since the 80s. We're playing it again in this new lineup, and it just works so well, So it's as I was saying earlier, the important thing is the band, is the lineup, is the chemistry. It's the band that drive it and the band that make it happen. The song is the vehicle, to quote Neil Young. And I think that's where we find ourselves very happily now, is with the right lineup, a band that we're loving playing together, and an audience that actually want to listen as well, which is wonderful. So hopefully these gigs that are coming up, are going to be great for everyone. And the band is, interest in the band is no doubt about it. It's been growing since we put Shia out, and people are starting to approach us. We're not having to work quite so hard for every bit of interest, in terms of getting a gig or something. So I'm full of kind of enthusiasm and you could say ambition in a way that I haven't been since we were playing the Marquee and playing Reading, and I'm thinking, wow, this could be going somewhere, I kind of feel that again, and that's creative satisfaction for the first time, absolutely for the first time since those early days. It's happening again now. Who'd have thought, 40 years on, that I'd be experiencing that again, and it's joyful,
That's cool. Yeah, I'm